Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Whiskey Cove. And on today's episode, we are reviewing two absolute bastions of the whiskey world. That is Old Forester President's Choice 2025 Bourbon and Old Forester 2025 Rye. This is the first release of rye that they've ever done. I'm very excited for this review. Run the video. All right then, folks, thank you for joining us for another new and exciting episode here on the Whiskey Cove. And we are reviewing these two fantastic bottles. There's a really fun and interesting story behind these because I was able to pick them up for very, very cheap. Go out and check my last store haul video. These are the last bottles that I talk about. It's definitely a great story, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So watch that video and you'll find out a little bit more about them. So we have the 2025 editions of the Old Forester President's Choices here. We have the Bourbon and we have the Rye. So the Bourbon is going to be aged 88 months, and this is going to be barrel number 169, 55.5% alcohol. And then this guy, the Rye, is going to be aged for 117 months, so a couple of years more than the Bourbon. Barrel number 39 and 57.55% ABV, so 2% ABV or full proof more than the Bourbon. So I think what we'll do is we'll taste the Bourbon first, just because I think the Rye has some more intense notes. So I think that would be the best way to kind of taste through these. So first up, we have the Old Forester President's Choice. So I have tried it before. I had a pour from a friend, which I'm very fortunate about, but I'm even more fortunate to have these bottles here now. Super vanilla-y on the nose, very sweet. You get a sweet vanilla caramel punch that is just jumping out of the glass. And I've just kind of poured these as they are. These bottles have been open for a while, and I can smell those notes just wafting up, jumping out of the glass. It's a little toasty, new charred American oak, and kind of like a little bit of touch of molasses there as well, because deep and darker sugars with like some of the marshmallow and bright toasty notes. I want to say on this guy, I'm getting almost like old-fashioned notes. You know, you get the citrus of orange, you get like a nice dark maraschino cherry, mix it all in with some good whiskey and a lump of ice. It's very, very approachable on the nose. With the heat coming from this 55.5% ABV, you'd expect more ethanol. There's just none there on this. It's beautiful on the nose. It is quintessential bourbon, but amped up with those darker, more burnt caramel flavor notes there. And when you find a distillery kind of puts out some of their flagship whiskey, it is really incredible what distilleries are able to do when it gets to like the higher proof stuff. And I talked about this before with like George T. Stagg. I have a George T. Stagg that's really close to hazmat, but you nose it and you just don't get any ethanol. It's all sweetness, it's all character from the whiskey, and this is no difference. Let's go in for a taste here. Very maple forward, very caramel forward, much like I was expecting. You get a big bunch of oak presence there as well, but not like a huge oak punch that is kind of totally drying out your palate. It pairs really well with the sweetness and kind of punches and rolls that finish on. Like I said, what is this, 88 months? So it's not like an incredibly long-aged whiskey, so you're not going to get more of that leather and tobacco note. It's all about the sweetness here and how rounded it is. Let's go in for another taste here. And that maraschino cherry jumps out even more so on the palate. I was kind of nosing a little bit and I was getting a little bit of that, but it's right there on the palate. And as it kind of goes through and kind of coats the palate, that really aids to the finish. The finish just goes on and on and on and on. And still, I can feel the oiliness of the whiskey just kind of sitting on my tongue, coating all my taste buds. A truly impressive whiskey. What we like to do on this channel is we like to rate a whiskey from 0 to 100, and then we also like to give value for money, A through F. For this value for money, well, I paid a lot less than what I should have paid for it. But for value for money, I'm going to give it a C. You know, it's pricier. Like I just picked up an Old Forester birthday bourbon, fortunately, but I paid like $250 for that. This is somewhat in that price category. So I'm going to say C. It's a great whiskey, but you know, $250 is a lot of money. Score of 100, I'm going to give this a 92. This is a phenomenal whiskey. One of my favorite whiskeys that I've had for quite a while. An absolute killer bottle. That is Old Forester's President's Choice Bourbon. Let's reset the palate and then jump into the rye. All right, now we are going in for the President's Choice rye. This does have a little bit more ABV, 57.55%, and more age, 117 months. Let's see how this kind of shows up in the glass here. So just right off the bat, or right off the rip, this is definitely a shade darker in the glass. This is more like a darker brown, what I would probably lean this more mahogany. Yes, you can say mahogany is a shade of brown if you like, but a little bit more deeper with tints of black in it too. Just looking at it in the glass, it looks incredible. Very viscous, just waiting to be nosed and drunk. So let's do exactly that. You're definitely picking up some rye notes, but it also has some very similar notes to the bourbon. So what I will say is, distilleries generally have a flavor profile. You know, if you're someone who's tried a lot of whiskey from different distilleries, you'll notice that kind of shows up in different brands of whiskey. And I think that's the same here. What I will say, that there is some caramel, burnt brown sugar sweetness here, but there is not nearly enough as sweet as this. But there's a very similar profile too. Another nose. Maybe a touch of licorice there, and I probably wouldn't have been able to pull that out, but I'm kind of looking for it. Yeah, really a nice rye, fresh baked rye bread loaf note in there, like the kind of savory anise kind of note there that you can sometimes get from rye. It's not very herbal, not really getting any mint, but then that cherry note's there. The caramel, the burnt oak barrel note is all there, and that's kind of like the hallmark of Old Forester. Like, as you can see, I have a bunch of Old Forester behind me on the left, and I get these sort of notes from all the Old Forester range, but with these two, it seems to be ramped up. It really kind of talks to just how good that they're able to get some of their whiskey. And don't get me wrong, I've had other Old Foresters that have been incredible, like the Old Forester 100 Black Label and some of the barrel strength Blue Labels too. But these are definitely something quite special. Let's go in for a taste here. This drink is really giving me kind of like mocha vibes, you know, like chocolate and coffee vibes on the palate. It doesn't stay as sweet as long as the bourbon does. It definitely dries out. And that must be the length of time that it's spent in the barrel, like I said, 117 months, which is actually quite a long time for rye. With bourbon, up to 15 years, some people will say is the sweet spot, but with rye, you really don't need to age it that long. So 170 months over 10 years, or right around 10 to 9 years, depending on my math today, is probably on the higher end of what you would expect a rye to be. Yes, you can get like Sazerac 18-year rye from Buffalo Trace. However, the flip side of that is you get Willet 4-year, which is the green labels, and that tastes incredible, and you don't get any youthful notes from that. I think this does the job really well. I think there's more oak presence with this. I'd like to see a little bit more sweetness to this bottle, but also at the same time, I understand that I'm drinking a rye. I understand that I'm drinking close to a 10-year rye, so you kind of need to balance that out in your mind. Much like the bourbon, the mouthfeel is incredible. It just kind of sits on your palate until it moves into the finish, where it kind of the sweetness goes away. But that initial kind of when it touches your palate, so thick, so viscous. I would say that the rye drink's a little hotter than the bourbon. I think the sweetness really tames this down. Not that it's necessarily hot, but I think with the rye, because of the lack of sweetness, the more oak, the kind of that alcohol note shows up, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. It's just, you know, you're reminded that you're drinking 114 proof whiskey or 57.55% ABV. So, two incredible bottles. What would I rate this, and what would I give a value for money? I'm going to throw the value for money right in line with the bourbon, and that is C. Again, an expensive bottle, but good enough that it hits that middle ground. And then score of 100, I'm going to give this 85. I do think the bourbon is spectacular. The rye is pretty good. It's more than pretty good. It's very good. However, if we're comparing the two, I really do like the bourbon a little bit more. You know, this is going straight into some of my top like 5 favorite bourbons, where the rye is probably in my top 10, but still an incredible rating for this bottle of whiskey. I'm very fortunate that I was able to pick these two up. So that's all we have time for today, folks. We got into these two incredible bottles. Thank you so much for watching at home as we drink through the world's whiskeys one glass at a time. Not bad whiskeys to start with. Cheers.